Welcome to the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. I'm Laurie Rivers with you, here to help you with some inspiration to get those aspirations out into the world and maybe help bring some of the anxiety down. It has been a couple of weeks, hasn't it, as Mars has stormed through Virgo and been making trines with Jupiter and Uranus. And that comes to an end this month when Mars enters Libra. And that will happen on the 26th. Okay. So we are in for a pretty wild week. I'm going to try to give you some strategies to deal with this very bumpy energy. If you've been watching the news, or if you're in Southern California, then you know it's been kind of a interesting weekend with waiting for Tropical Storm Hillary to landfall, and then the amount of rain, and it depends on where you're at on the severity of that. I was just listening before I hit the record button, and it's gotten pretty windy outside where I live. And it's been raining kind of weird. I took a video of it to show the mods, and it's almost like if, powder snow was rain. It's very interesting. So, not that we didn't have heavier rain earlier in the day. It was just a very bizarre kind of rain. And we have to get used to things being a little more bizarre as we move forward because climate change is here. I said back in 2022, or actually at the end of 2021, that by July of 2022, climate change could no longer be ignored. And we're going to have to adjust to rapidly changing circumstances, and that can be stressful. So we're going to talk about ways we can soothe our nervous system. This week has quite a lot of astrology to it. We're looking at Monday being very, very Monday. So by 11 a.m. Pacific, we should see some pretty interesting events happen on the West Coast, East Coast. That would be 2 p.m. your time, because the moon will be conjunct the lunar south node, and it is square Pluto, which makes for some unstable ground. So we might see a little bit of seismic activity increasing. And I'll lay odds that we see things increasing globally, because I know I have global listeners here. Globally, we will see an increase in seismic activity through the week. And that could be also volcanic. And so, just if you live near active faults or active volcanic regions, be aware, pay attention to any alert systems you can. Am I saying it's going to happen 100%? No, I'm not. I'm just saying that there is a likelihood of an increase in activity. It could go a lot of different ways, guys. So there's that. We'll talk about Mercury retrograde on this episode as well. Now, if you're a patron, you got your weekly horoscope pages. I didn't get them out last week because I didn't have an internet connection to write them on. That was quite something. I'll talk a little bit about the trip we made to Oregon and back, just in time for a tropical storm. Good times. In that horoscope, I give you a Mercury retrograde guide. And so I'll talk a little bit about Mercury retrograde, what I think is going to be up on deck with that, and how you can surf the cosmic tide with that one. And of course, we'll be doing patron shoutouts as always, because without patrons, there is no Awake Space Astrology Podcast. We'll answer some astrology questions at the end. And we'll talk about some new stuff going on in the Patreon. It's kind of exciting. So we have our public podcast, and now we have a private podcast that is only on Spotify. Now, you might be listening to this on another podcast player. If you're a patron and you don't use Spotify, that's okay. You can take the RSS feed link and use that in a podcast player. We've got a couple people who do that. But the patron posts, the audio posts for patrons now have their own Spotify podcast. So I'll put a link to the post in the show notes so that if you're a patron, you can link up your Spotify and your Patreon account. And if you're in a tier that I did audio only for, you'll be able to listen to that on Spotify instead of having to search through my Patreon because, I post a lot. So that's exciting news. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So let's get to the astrology. There's a lot going on, and we've made a lot of jokes on TikTok about hurricanes. And don't forget the tarantulas mating season in San Diego. I hope the tarantulas are okay. They're actually good for the ecosystem. So we'll talk about the astrology and how you can move through it because, well, by golly, it's still going to be bumpy for quite a little while. I'd love to tell you things smooth out. We get some ease. It's not anytime soon. So we have to take our consciousness in hand and learn how to help our nervous systems out so we're not on constant alert and we're able to be more at ease regardless of the circumstances. So we'll talk about that coming up next. I've always said the universe can be a joker. And I say that because I have this love of making very detailed plans. And they have this habit of going awry. Like I can plan everything to the nth degree and then something just comes out of the blue. And that would be because I have a natal south node in Virgo with Pluto conjunct it. I can speak. It's late. Sorry, guys. And I'm meant to trust the process. I'm not meant to be overly organized. I need to use those organizational skills. But if I get too planned, Pluto just is like, yeah, no, that's not happening. And the trip to Oregon was one of those. I was like, I can do my work, I can do my readings, and everything will be okay. I can do all the things. Forgetting, of course, that not only do I have that natal issue, of course I never forget I have it, but sometimes I forget to account for it. And then I have Pluto in opposition to my Mercury and my Sun right now by transit. Super fun. Good times. So I should know that things will probably not go quite to plan. Now, Casey was fantastic. We had a really good trip, and it was very nice to know we can travel together. It was just easy. I could see that with all of the mods. We could just do it easy. And everything was pretty good with my mentors as well. And next episode, I'll have an interview with Thomas C. Chavez, who was my mentor when it came to energy work, understanding my natural abilities as a psychic and intuitive, and who taught me a lot about channeling. Without him, I would have been completely freaked out by what was going on way back. I think it was like 2002, 2003. Long time ago, 20 years ago. I've gotten to that stage. I'm like, I don't know. It was weird. Anyway, without Thomas, a lot of the metaphysical things that had been happening to and for me I was begging a therapist at one point. I'm like, you need to institutionalize me. I don't know. This stuff is crazy. Remember, I got a Pisces North Node. I had to learn to be comfortable with the wackadoodle stuff in life. And I say that with love and humor. Anyway, so I had no internet connection. For those of you who know me well, which, by the way, are we driving to work together? I haven't asked those questions lately, and I feel remiss. If we're driving and it's raining, I want you to keep your eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2. I won't make any sudden moves, I promise. If we're just having some coffee, I hope it's good coffee. Okay. If you're dropping the kids off to school, it's okay, get a hanky. It's hard, I know, they're growing up. But anyway, so I had no internet. And for those of you who know me, I work all the time. It's my drug of choice. I have an unaspected Saturn in my 6th house. I love what I do. I love every ounce of it. But sometimes I work a lot and it makes me tired. And I was getting to that very, very tired stage. I don't burn out. I don't hate what I do. I just get really tired. And try what I might, I could not get a decent internet connection up in Oregon. And I couldn't even get a decent public connection to really get any work done. And so I had to reschedule readings and which I hate to do. I hate rescheduling. I will show up sick as a dog to a reading and do it well. I know, because once I questioned myself, I'm like, why did you do that reading? And then I listened back, I'm like, all right, it was coherent, it was cohesive, it was accurate. Okay, cool. Even though I no longer remember doing it. So for me to have that amount of time, that doesn't mean I didn't get other things done. I was cataloging some of my mentor's work. I'll have to take another trip up to do more. But the hardest part was done, which was planning and using my South Node in the most appropriate way, which was to get the naming rules going for the archiving and all of that. We have 20 some years to catalog, so got three scanned. So yay. So that tipped me off to Mercury retrograde, because I was like, all right, what happened? I could look at it as, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I couldn't meet my obligations. You can hear my Saturn speaking. Or I can listen to the insight I had as I was going to my car to retrieve some stuff from Malcolm. And it was in the evening, and I was like, gosh, why is this happening? What's going on? Is it timelines? Is it interference? And there was a little hint of a mental chuckle, and you need a break. You need to restore. I was like, oh, yeah, there's probably that. So I did restore. It was nice to be with old friends, part of the spiritual community I belonged to for many years. It was good to be with my mentors and to reconnect and to witness how I've grown as a person. I haven't seen them in 5 years. I think I talked about that on another episode. I haven't seen them in 5 years. And I was able to see who I've grown into. So if you're a young person and you're listening, you're like, but you're old, Laurie. You're in your 50s. If you choose a growth mindset, if you choose to self-actualize, you're never done. You're never done. That was something Thomas and I talked about when I interviewed him. You are never done growing and learning. You're not done till you're done. Done. And it got me thinking, because Mercury is hanging out around my Pluto and my South Node, and it'll go retrograde here on the 23rd. I was like, what can I learn from this to share about Mercury retrograde? from this experience, because remember, I also have Pluto opposite my Mercury, which is like living in a Mercury retrograde, kind of, because I'm having to use my mental faculties a little differently. Doesn't mean I forgot everything I know. I don't. No, not at all. But what I've really noticed is concepts of self. And when I was writing the horoscopes on Sunday, I really noticed that theme was up for everybody in different ways for this week, depending on your rising sign or the house the moon was transiting. The lunations are prepping us for that Mercury retrograde. If we choose to accept the assignment, transits don't force anything upon you. You have free will, in theory. But if you haven't been taught how to use your free will, if you haven't been able to get access to the information that can help you train your own mind to step back from very strong or enculturated beliefs and kind of take the job of the observer and really look at yourself. Everybody talks about shadow work, which tends to be pretty emotional, and there's nothing wrong with it. Well, there can be if you get sucked in too deep. You can deep dive into that. You really shouldn't do it without some kind of support. I love therapists who are open to supporting clients through that process. I think that's a wonderful thing. But it's a little different when you're training your mind, because we become emotionally attached to certain ideas, beliefs, personal dogmas, and limiting beliefs, things we think about ourselves that aren't kind. Now, Virgo is very perceptive energy. It'll see every little detail, whether you like it or not. Every freaking little detail. And it's really easy to have that become criticism. Now, that's a very modern take on Virgo. Virgo is as compassionate as Pisces. As compassionate. It just doesn't dive in to the situation in the same way. Virgo energy is going to step back and analyze things a little bit. And you have to be careful, or you could analyze yourself into a corner because you're looking, needs improvement. And Virgo is about refining. But I don't know if you've ever done any woodwork or you've ever done any sculpting, whether it was with wool and needle felting or with, stone or clay. You don't work at the piece to polish the flaws when you're creating. You're working with how to take something that's already good and make it better. And that's what I want you to think about for yourself as you move through Mercury retrograde, depending on where Mercury is transiting through the houses. And patrons, I'll get you your house by house breakdown. The goal is to look at what's working and refine that, make it better. Instead of leaning into what's broken and parsing it and digging at the wound, kind of like picking at a scab. Don't do that. It's just going to make it worse. It's just going to get infected. And we do that to ourselves mentally and emotionally. We pick at things. It takes 90 seconds to have a strong emotion wash through your entire system hormonally. 90 seconds. What keeps the grudge alive, what keeps the bad feelings alive, what keeps things alive is the retelling of the incident. And sometimes it's so justified because when that jerk did that thing that made you feel bad, right? It feels so good to talk about that person, right? It feels so good to show everybody what an ass they were. And the more you tell the story, the more you overload your nervous system, the more you are pumping those hormones through your body. Now, I'm not saying keep secrets and don't talk. That's not what I'm saying. But if it happened 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, and you're keeping that story very active in your consciousness, top of mind, you're exhausting yourself. You're exhausting yourself. That's why we can go to therapy, we can do art, there's so many ways. You can go running, you could take a bath, you can learn to change your body postures, because when you change your body postures, you can retrain your mind. That's one of the using somatic methods from a variety of techniques paired with mindfulness breathing techniques, I was able to realign my entire nervous system. Okay. It took a long time. It's not something you can do overnight, but it is something you could certainly practice starting with Mercury retrograde. Now, one of the ways we remind ourselves of things is we might listen to certain songs, or we might drive by certain neighborhoods, or we might watch a lot of TikToks on a certain subject, and we get a very strong narrative running. Don't do that this Mercury retrograde. Use this opportunity to kind of stop some of those habits and lean into, take an account of what is good, what's already good, and how can you make it better? Okay? What's already good, and how can you make it better? This isn't magical thinking. It isn't wishful thinking. Okay? Don't think, oh, well, I'll screw it up. That's not going to help. Don't luxuriate into that kind of thinking. And be like, Laurie, I've thought this way my whole life. Yeah, I thought that way my whole life too. And I was still able to change it and notice it and redirect my thinking. I didn't heal in my 20s. I didn't heal in my 30s. I didn't clear 0 clinical markers till I was 42 years old. Yes, it is the answer to everything. Got your white towel? It's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference for those of you who aren't the nerdlings. I was middle-aged because neuroscience wasn't even available to support any of my theories until I was in my late 30s. You guys are so lucky to have so much more information to look up and so much more support, so many resources available. Whether it's through podcasts or books or therapy. And I know not everybody can afford it. I get it. Hell, I could barely afford it when I went to it in my 40s, or I was late 30s when I started. Boy, was that an argument with my former spouse. Oh, former. Huh. Speaking of, Mercury retrograde does not mean your ex will contact you. But if they do, remind yourself of why they're an ex. And also, I don't know, why didn't you block them? I mean, okay, some people can't because the kids, co-parenting, yada, 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 yada. But you're already in contact with that person. But if you're not, why are they not blocked? Block them. I'm Scorpio rising. Hit the block button. Saves lives. So this Mercury retrograde will be interesting. Use your sense of curiosity. Like, okay, well, if this is good, how can it be better? I like this. What else can I learn about it? Use the attitude of the learner. Mercury retrograde is a time to work on existing products or projects. It's not a time to start something brand new. Like if you're like, oh my God, I got the best idea. Write those ideas down. Mercury retrograde really isn't the time to start something new. It's time to finish up what we already started or revise something that's existing. Now, for those of you who are like, but I'm going to buy a house or a car or I got to lease an apartment. If you are resolving a matter, like if you need a place to live, then don't go, well, I have to wait till Mercury's direct to find a place to live. Find a place to live. Okay? It's okay to sign a lease during Mercury retrograde, especially if you needed a place to live. Same with buying a car or buying a house. If it was in process, if it had delays and it was in process, even better. But if you wake up one morning mid-Mercury retrograde and goes, that's it, I'm buying a house today, probably it's not going to work out to plan. Or it could be you liked something and it went off the market and it comes back on the market again. Then go for it. Okay? So that's Mercury retrograde. And that happens in the evening, late afternoon, evening of the 23rd of August. It does not start in the morning. The morning is when the sun moves into Virgo. The sun moves into Virgo and the moon... You know what happens when I start to laugh, right? This chart. Oh, God. So everybody's going to be blaming Mercury retrograde, but Mercury will not be retrograde to blame on the 23rd yet at this time. This is 10:47 a.m. Pacific, and the sun will have moved into Virgo hours before that, and the moon will be in an opposition with Uranus. Before that, it was in an opposition to Jupiter. Wednesday is fascinating. Now, I know that's a day Trump's supposed to go to the jail. I'm thinking that might go interestingly because the moon will be on his IC. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see what time it happens. We'll see what happens afterwards. We know he has an interview with Tucker Carlson because Tucker Carlson is a creep. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Tucker doesn't believe a word of it. He doesn't even like the guy. He's just going to do it for money. That's all he cares about. Ugh. But anyway, it's going to be crunchy dunchy, guys. So I want you to keep in mind what I was talking about. Look at what is actually going right. Write down all of the good stuff that you have going on in your life. You say, there's nothing going good. That's not true. You could have a favorite pair of socks. Okay. You could have seen a beautiful sunrise or a beautiful sunset. You could have had the best damn cup of tea you've ever had in your life. Or you might even thought you were out of tea bags, but you found one in a drawer. Lean into that. Count your blessings. My great-grandma used to tell me that. She lived a really interesting life. She was born in 1899. And nothing like having an original source when you read Little House on the Prairie and you're trying to fact check, and your great-grandma lived a lot like that as a little girl. You'd be like, so is this accurate? And she'd be like, yes. I'd be like, oh, wow. So, but she didn't live an easy life. She had a joy about her. She had a wicked sense of humor. She was so smart, they skipped her up 2 grades. And she graduated 8th grade at like 11. And then got her teacher's certificate at 13. They wouldn't let her go to the high school because high school cost money back then. It wasn't private. It was all private education at that level. And that was for boys. My great-grandmother loved to learn. She was a very insatiably curious woman. And so she worked as a teacher from 13 to about 16, where she got engaged to a neighboring farmer from a wealthy farming family. And by wealthy, it's comparative. Okay, they weren't millionaires by any means. But anyway, she married this young farmer. Not all that romantic. And her engagement photo had her reading a book because she wanted to show she could read. It was a major accomplishment. This would have been 1915. That was the engagement. She was married she was engaged at 16. Yeah, 1915. At 17, she was married. And at 18, she had her one and only biological child. The labor was very difficult, and the doctor screwed it up so bad that she could no longer bear children. My great-grandmother loved children. The doctor had done it to more than one woman. He drank, and he was found unalived. He had an accident. Wink, wink, nod, nod. The baby was 10 months old, and it died of the flu. And she was heartbroken. Yeah, she was just 19. Couldn't have any more kids. Loved children. And I'm sure she would have moved heaven and earth for that baby, knowing her. And so this is now in the 20s, and she adopted my grandmother and my great uncle, because they came from a family where there was like 10 kids, and the mama had died, and she had 10 kids, and she died at 31. 31. Right. That's what happens when we don't have adequate health care or bodily autonomy. Right. The Dust Bowl wasn't happening just yet, but they noticed things weren't right, and they sold their farm to family, and they moved out to Oregon with my grandmother and my great uncle. The Great Depression came. At least they had a nice, they had a decent house with a decent amount of land. It wasn't a farm. They didn't want a farm. But it was big enough to have a little garden and a couple fruit trees. And they helped a lot of people come out, whether it was friends or families, and find jobs during the Depression. And then the war happened. And before the war happened, my grandmother ended up marrying my grandfather, and it was not a good marriage. And she ended up, after the war, dying pretty much from domestic violence. I would attribute it to that. They say an intestinal blockage, but she was so stressed out, leaving her 4 children without a mother. And my grandmother lost a second child. And she took in my mother and my uncle, the 2 oldest, preferred not to live with her because they were older, and she had rules. She was a Capricorn. And they wanted to go on with their lives. When I asked her if she loved her first husband, who I never knew, everybody else knew him. I did not. He died before I was born. And he died after they were married for 52 years. I asked her if she loved him, and she said it was a marriage of convenience. I'm like, oh. I had no idea what that meant. I was 9 years old. I was much older when I understood that. She got to be happy starting at around the time I was born in 1969, when she was 70. She got married to the great-grandpa I remember, Grandpa Troy, who was a younger man by 10 years. Well, she was a player. No, she wasn't. She was not a player. If any of my family are listening, I am not making fun of Lydia, okay? Sheesh. She might find that funny, because I found her dirty book box after she died. She read some raunchy novels. I was shocked. I was also 11, and they would get taken away from me, because I'd be like, what is this word? It was a different time, young people. We didn't have the internet. You had to go through old people's book boxes. I'm saying all of this, and I'm giving you my great-grandmother's story so you understand. And I've just given you little tidbits. There's so much more tragedy in her life. And yet, she taught me to focus on what was going right. And she would say, count your blessings, Laurie. Count your blessings. And I could be really grumpy, especially in the morning. I'm not a morning person. And I'd be like, I don't know what's good about today. And I'd be like 7 or 8. I don't know what's good about it. And she said, well, you're here with me. Isn't that good? And I'd be like, yeah, that's good. I love being with you. Okay. And how was your breakfast? I'd say, oh, you made my favorite pancakes. And she would put dark Caro syrup over the top of them. And, oof. I love that more than maple syrup. I always keep a bottle in my cupboard. It's not bougie, but it's a memory. And I say, oh, you made my favorite breakfast. She say, okay, what else is good about today? You tell me something. And I'd say, well, I got to wear your apron. She's like, oh, okay, that's nice. And we'd go on and on and on. It taught me to look for what's right and look for more of it and make more of it. That's how you ride the wave, this Mercury retrograde. All right, you heard the music. All right, are we to work yet? Or are we still in traffic? If we're looking for parking, remember, use my trick. We get perfect parking every time. That's our expectation. All right, it is time for Patron Shoutouts. I want to thank everybody for being in with me here in Patreon. We've got Jessica, Katrina, Lene, Sarah, Alma, Deborah, Marilyn, CM, Vivian, Valerie, Patricia, Nikki, Courtney, Ariana, Mary Frances, Patricia, and Aaron. Big thank yous to everybody. Hey, if you're a patron and you haven't been getting messages and you're wondering what's going on, it could be that the payment glitch through Patreon was a problem. I'm going to post the help link for how to fix that problem up in Patreon so you can easily get that fixed. I messaged everybody that might have had that problem happen. And but I know not everybody checks their email, so I'll do a Patreon post with the patron help links, because Patreon is really, really helpful, and they've got a lot of great articles. Now remember, I am going to be doing more audio for patron only, depending on your tier. There will be all patron audio posts, and there will be some very specific tier information. I'm very excited about that. I know people like video, but audio is so much easier for me to produce right now until I am closer to my team, and that will happen in a couple of months. And then we'll do some fancy smancy video stuff, but I'm excited for the audio side. That way you can just put me on your headphones and get the dishes done, drive to work, do a road trip, and binge on astrology content and energy work content and mindfulness and whatever else comes up. Remember, I appreciate you more than you know. We're going to be cleaning up the Discord. We're going to be simplifying a few things. I am going to be using that Mercury retrograde to my advantage. I'm going to do some cleanup because, Mercury's still in Virgo, right? All right, let's talk about the astrology of the week in the next episode. Or not episode. Oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Laurie, get this thing finished and go to bed. But I'm going to talk about the astrology of the week. what more you can expect, and we'll talk a little bit about some breathing techniques that you can use to help ground yourself, because you're really going to need it. We're moving towards the Pisces full moon on the 28th. I told you August would be a full moon sandwich, and it hasn't disappointed. So let's talk about what the interior of the sandwich looks like this week. All right, I'm going to answer some patron questions here, and we have so many for me to get through that I'll be doing some patron-only podcasts with the Q&A. So get those questions in on the Google form. Let me see here. I opened it. I just have too many tabs open. All right, first one is from Priscilla. When two planets are close within 6 degrees, but in different signs, how do they influence each other, or don't they? So I can tell you've been paying attention to when I teach, because a lot of times people use really wide orbs. I like a 6-degree orb. Technically, you can go to an 8-degree orb, but what happens when they're in different signs? It's kind of like they're talking through a tin can instead of having a face-to-face conversation. Or maybe they have different dialects. Okay, so somebody, like when you heard me and Miss Carrie talking, so they'll be able to speak, but maybe the accents are different for the ones to understand. It's not as clear communication as when they're in the same sign. So they do have some influence, but it isn't as strong if they were in the same sign. That was a very awesome question, Priscilla. All right. Next one. So, Dulcie, if the hypothetical planet 9 were to be discovered, what effect would it have on astrology? It is a celestial body, but we haven't known about it for very long. Would it change anything? I think what happens when we discover a significant celestial body for the first time, it actually reflects a broadening of human consciousness. So let's use Pluto as an example. We can argue and debate over Pluto being a planet, not a planet. It could be representative of a lot of different things, like all the trans-Neptunian planets. It could be the representative of that, the delegate, so to speak. If you look back at 1930, and we had the beginning of the atomic age, quantum mechanics theory was starting to take hold, and again, the atomic age was getting started. We were well aware after World War I the devastation of war. That's why they called it erroneously the war to end all war. And so we were thinking differently. People were starting to see themselves in different ways as individuals versus kind of the beaten down collective mentality. It wasn't true community. It was people who learned to stick together out of protection because of, if we come out of medieval Europe, so people who had come from a history of being serfs into having more autonomy, especially, in the United States. Not everybody, but it was a burgeoning thought form. And so Pluto kind of represented that change of mindset, changes societies that were coming. So any body that, if it was significant, would probably be reflective of mindset changes, social changes, cultural changes of some kind, especially the outer planets. So, good question. And we'd have to observe it to see what it really meant. And of course, everybody would immediately have to assign it meaning, because that's what people do. But we really can't. We have to observe. All right. What's our next question? Amelia, Are physical ailments or issues visible in the natal chart? Any thoughts about the ethics of medical astrology? We can. So there's a short answer. Yes. However, you have to be fairly skilled to be able to see it. And it is unrecommended to attempt to diagnose anybody because you're not a doctor. As far as the ethics of medical astrology, I don't have a problem. Ethically, there's nothing wrong with medical astrology other than I haven't seen anybody actually practice medical astrology correctly. So, like, there's lots of ethical problems with the Facebook groups because there's people diagnosing people in there who are not doctors or healthcare professionals. And they also give bad information. So there's lots of ethics involved there, ethical breaches. But in the study of medical astrology, it can be very, very useful. Again, I caution people, astrologers are not diagnosticians. Okay, we're not. I was just talking to my intermediate class on this subject, not medical astrology, but reminding them of the ethics involved. And it's not your job to wow people with, oh, wow, did you have your spleen taken out? When was the last time somebody used a leech on you? I'm just making fun of maybe somebody read Lily's work or something. But, that's not what we do. We wow people by asking questions and asking good questions. And now I do have people come to me for transit readings who might have medical issues. Sometimes I have people who have a terminal diagnosis come to me for astrology readings. And they have a lot of questions, and I refer them for medical things always back to medical professionals. But then we look at how they can best live life too, because that's what astrology is for, right? So sometimes I'll see something that's going on and I'll ask how somebody's feeling. And if I see a challenge to their health, I will say, hey, you might want to go to a doctor and get it checked out. I don't see anything horrible, but maybe it's time for a physical, or maybe it's time, talk to them about, this kind of support or that kind of support. Just like I'll refer people to therapists when I see something that they might need more support around. That's a good question. All right. So Allie's asking, what are some less known synastry placements that can indicate a long-term committed relationship? Now, speaking of ethics, I don't feel ethically good about answering this question because people will run to their charts and look for these things. And I know you will. But here's the deal. Some of the most powerful relationships I've had weren't long. Okay. They were, in fact, I've had momentary meetings with people that were life-changing. And I've had long-term relationships that were draining, and impeding. So the idea that for a relationship to have value, that it has to be a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship or a lock it down, sign a contract relationship, but I found that there can be 10th house connections in partners who are committed to a similar vision or ambition, and that's always fascinating to find. So I'll give you something to play with there. All right, I'll do one more, and then I gotta go to bed. I can feel it. I can barely keep my eyes open. She's been getting up in the morning, guys. I don't know what happened. I answered this. Hang on. I'm looking for another one. So, Angela in Kentucky. Can you explain more about a person's progressed chart? Thank you for this, by the way. Oh, Angela, that's sweet. A progressed chart shows your maturity, and we do a year for a day. And so the sun basically, like, I'm 54, so you would count out 54 days from July 21st, 1969. And then that would be the progressed birthday. Same time, same place. And then you end up with a chart that shows, it shows the maturity of the person. You never lose your natal chart. You never, ever lose your natal chart. And after your mid 40s into your early 50s, if you have been doing like mindfulness work, or you've been working on your consciousness, or you've been on a self-actualization quest, you might want to take a look at the progress chart as well as the natal chart for transits, because it isn't that you ever outgrow the natal chart. It's just you address your environment with experience, with perspective that you gain through time and experience. You're not born with that perspective. You gain that perspective, and that's reflected in the progress chart. I don't think progress charts are extremely useful to go in depth study on until after you're through your Uranian opposition, and that's from experience. You can look at them and it'll make sense of some things, especially for those of you who were born with placements at the end of signs. So you'll be like, oh, like I couldn't decide if I was, I'd read books about sun signs before I studied astrology, and I'm like, well, I could be a Cancer or a Leo. Well, that's because I was born at the very end of Cancer, and my sun progressed to Leo, when I was like 2. So I didn't become a Leo, right? I was always a Cancerian. But as I grew, and I grew up in a household, it was probably a defense mechanism, because for God's sake, the amount of Leo energy around me growing up was tremendous. My mom's a Leo rising, my brother's a Leo rising, my dad's a Leo sun. I had to adopt it, adopt the energy of that progression to survive. I was the lone water sign. My mom's a Gemini sun, my brother's an Aries sun, my dad's a Leo sun. So I was the water sign, and one of these things just doesn't belong here. One of these things just isn't the same. It's an old Sesame Street song, but that was kind of how I felt. And so putting on the guise wasn't a pretense. I probably picked up those habits or demeanors. So that would be a way for a younger person to kind of examine, oh, there's some patterns. I can see that. But you always keep your natal chart. All right. I'll answer more astrology questions this week for patrons, and that'll be an all patron post. And you can listen to it in the patron only podcast. I'm so excited about that. I don't know what to do with myself. I want to thank all of you for being listeners. I know you're listening in from all over the world. I know things are really uncertain, and we're growing as a species. And sometimes growing is messy. Be kind to yourself. Be gentle with yourself. You are more worthy and deserving of kindness and value. And if you don't give it to you, where else are you going to get it? And that's my message for this week. Be easy on yourself. Much love and thank you.